Last month, on our series on great Oklahoma Scottish Rite leaders, we covered the life and accomplishments of Brother Frank Craig, a McAlester citizen. He was the fourth consecutive leader of Oklahoma Scottish Rite to be from the McAlester Valley. This era covered 16 years. Tonight we will talk about the man who continued that streak. His name was A.U. Thomas. You will recall that Craig, who liked to be called Frank, died unexpectedly in 1926 at the age of 56. Brother Thomas was named his successor, and of course this is his story. I have labeled Frank Craig and A.U. Thomas as the Masonic twins. As we unfurl his life, see if you can detect how these men were so alike. A.U. Thomas was born December the 2nd, 1865, on a farm near Franklin Grove, Illinois, which was a small farming village about 100 miles due west of Chicago. And you will note his birth date. It was 8 months after the end of the Civil War. His parents were deeply patriotic, with feelings, of course, for the North. And so he was named Abraham Ulysses Thomas. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to recognize that his first name was in honor of President Lincoln, and his middle name was for General and later President Grant. Young Thomas, however, as he went through life, preferred A.U. After finishing high school in Franklin Grove, he attended the State University in Normal, Illinois, and at the age of 20, he received a position with a bank. This launched his lifelong career in banking, and this was in 1885 when he left college. The next 15 years of his life are fuzzy, just pieces and scraps of information. So what we do know is as follows. He left college for a banking job, like I said, in 1885. That's a fact. And then he probably needed money and planned to finish college. That's speculation. He left Illinois for Vernon, Texas. That's a fact. Vernon, Texas is down in the area of Wichita Falls, in that Childers, Texas. It's right along in there. Anyway, we don't know why he went there. While he was there, he probably continued in banking. That's speculation. We don't know. Don't know. His Masonic career began in Vernon while he was there in Texas. That's a fact. So anyway, he was made a Master Mason in Vernon Lodge number 655 on April the 16th, 1893. So you'll see that's 8 years later after he left college. He also started his York Rite work while he was in Vernon by receiving the chapter and council degrees, and later became a Knights Templar in McAlester. After he got to McAlester, he's got his Blue Lodge and the 2/3 of his York Rite. Thomas returned to Illinois, to the city of Dixon, which was near his hometown area. We know not when. We don't know when he left for Vernon. We don't know when he came back. So anyway, what we do know, another fact, is that he was married to Miss Margaret Curtis in Stockton, Illinois, which is again in that same general northern Illinois area, to Miss Margaret Curtis. And that was in 1899. He was 34 years old at this time. That marriage through the years produced 2 daughters, Cornelia and Harriet. So this time we get to 1902. and the fuzzy area is ended, at least for a while. Some factual stuff in there. He's in McAlester. Thomas' first acquaintance with Indian Territory and McAlester was through an unusual set of circumstances. He was commissioned by a firm to make a survey of this area to see if they should construct an interurban line to link surrounding mining camps and towns with McAlester. His favorable recommendation resulted in the streetcar system, which we had thereafter, and by 1904 it connected Hartshorn and everything west to McAlester. Evidently, while he was here for the streetcar deal, he liked the opportunities he saw in Indian Territory and McAlester, and he settled here. So, shortly after arrival, he and E.C. Million organized the American National Bank. E.C. Million, familiar name, was the grandfather of Paul Million, who was our SGIG here in recent years. Thomas became the cashier of that bank, and he held this position for the next 15 years. During these years, he was very active in civic activities. He was president of the Rotary Club, the Chamber of Commerce. He worked with Salvation Army, chairman of the Red Cross, and during World War I, he was very active in the Liberty Bond sales and drives. As for all previous great leaders, which we've talked about so far in this series, you wonder how in the world they got everything done. But they did. Let's now examine his Masonic career after arrival in McAlester. He demitted from all his Masonic connections in Vernon, Texas, and re-affiliated with the McAlester bodies. He joined Masonic Lodge number 81, which of course is later 96, and became worshipful master in later years, right, not immediately there. He was also active in the Grand Lodge as his banking ability was noticed, and he served on the Finance and Appropriations Committee. He remained active in his York Rite after he came to McAlester, and actually became commander of the Knights Templars in 1910. He became a member of the India Shrine in Oklahoma City. So he was basically active in everything that was here, that was available. And there was a lot available. But it was the Scottish Rite where he found his true love. The Scottish Rite, as you all know, was just in the formation stages back there at the turn of the century. So he received his LOP degrees January the 28th, 1904 in McAlester. The Rose Croix degrees were conferred on Thomas May the 14th, 1904 in the Tabernacle, our wood frame building. You know, the letters temporary for the Rose Croix charter had just been received in McAlester, and so he was able to take his second division of our Scottish Rite degrees. His Kadash and Consistory degrees were taken in a week later in Guthrie, as McAlester did not have received their charter for these degrees until the next year of 1905. So basically, he got his LOP in January, and then the rest of his Scottish Rite activities were done in May, all of 1904. So A.U. Thomas became a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason in May of 1904. And when McAlester received the letters temporary charter for the Kadash and Consistory degrees, which, like I said, was 1905, he was appointed Master of the Consistory degrees, which office he held until he was appointed Deputy of the Supreme Council in 1926. This meant that he was one of the four masters who ran the operations of the Valley of McAlester for 21 years. Also, he was active in degree work during this time, as were his two predecessors. His leadership qualities were recognized early, and he was decorated a KCCH in 1907, and 2 years later he received his 33rd degree designation. And then, after 18 years of dedicated service, and after the death of his close friend, Frank Craig, he was elected Deputy of the Supreme Council. And this is the surprising action. This is reported by Bob Davis in his book. 2 days after election as the deputy, he was elected an active member, i.e., that is, he was a SGIG designation. Bob says that at the same Supreme Council session, he was, so, and I kind of question that because I have some some Oklahoma Masons that called him deputy after that. So this deserves a little bit more attention, and which I didn't have time to do. But anyway, if it's true, I hope he didn't buy a deputy cap, as he would have to buy another one in 2 days. Well, A.U. Thomas served 9 years as the SGIG, which at the time was the longest tenure for any of the previous Oklahoma sovereigns. During these years, a lot of hard work and tough conditions prevailed as the economic collapse and the Great Depression took place. Before his election to the rank of SGIG, he was the chairman of the McAlester Building Committee, whose job was to plan for a new temple building. So this was prior to 1926. So you can see that the thought and the planning for this building was already underway in 1926. Well, to carry this on forward right now, he later was head of the planning commission. Okay, then when they get down to the building committee, he remained the chairman of the building committee, which did all of this work on insurance subscriptions and all that. I didn't know that he could do that as a SGIG, where he could still be active as. Now I know he couldn't be an officer because he had to leave his post as the master of Kadash for the consistory, but he still was the. And that kind of surprised me, but it indicates that he was a true McAlsterite and was interested in the continuing activity toward building a new building here in McAlester. He was the first SGIG to become a member of St. Luke's Conclave of the Red Cross of Constantine. He eventually was elected puissant sovereign of that group and was serving as treasurer upon his death. Now, when I first read that, I thought, oh, I don't think that's right, because Perry Freeman was in on the original group of the Red Cross. But then I got to think, well, Perry was in the SGIG. So I guess the statement holds, it's true. Okay. He had on his shoulders the declining membership, and at the same time, both temples were wrestling with construction debts, particularly McAlester. Of course, these years were the Depression years. On March the 30th, 1936, he died of an unexpected heart attack. His wife, Margaret, contacted Ed Burks. This is what took place when he had the heart attack. His wife contacted Ed Burks of the Masonic Temple office, who immediately came with a physician from Albert Pike Hospital, but it was too late. Now, he lived just across the street from the temple, right over here on the northeast corner of 2nd and Adams. So anyway, He died there in March the 30th, 1936. So A.U. Thomas was another Mason's Mason, a thoroughly good man, deeply interested in the welfare of not only his beloved fraternity, but also the city and state. He was known to have helped numerous young men attend college long before our scholarship program ever began. His many acts of charity were done without fanfare, pretty much like his own personality. He was not a big public speaker like Perry Freeman and some of the other previous people who he succeeded, but he did things in a very orderly, business-like way and in a low-key manner. This completes the story of Abraham Ulysses Thomas, a low-key leader, a good man, a good Mason who deserves to be counted among Oklahoma's Scottish Rite leaders. And now here's why I have labeled A.U. Thomas and Frank Craig as twins. Both were bankers. As a matter of fact, one time, Craig was president of the City National and Thomas was his vice president. Both were active Presbyterians, and when coupled with Busby, this made 3 of the 4 of our first SGIG members of the same church in McAlester. Both died unexpectedly while in office as the sovereign. So these things, and there are other smaller things, but really it's kind of amazing. I will end this presentation with just a personal note. A.U. Thomas was the last of the first generation McAlester men who served as Sovereign Grand Inspector General. So the string ended. The streak was completed. He and Busby, Haley, and I'll include Freeman, and Craig, along with about 8 or 10 other men, actually established McAlester as a Scottish Rite Valley. They nursed it through tough conditions. You know, 2 other cities in Indian Territory had already tried it and never progressed past the LOP. McAlester almost had the same fate, but they made it. They were proud of their accomplishments, proud of themselves, and all of them were not only consumed with Masonry, but found time to be active in their community. This made Masonry a part of the community. They were not just a bunch of squirrels who met up on the hill there and were all doing funny things. These men treated the Scottish Rite with reverence. It was different than a civic club. When A.U. Thomas died, most of these amazing men were gone. When people ask, why is this big, beautiful Masonic building located in McAlester? Well, the reason was these guys. These about 10 or 12 men total they were in all of the degrees, they did all the work, it was amazing. And so they were good enough locally to be considered as the leader for the state. So this is the story of A.U. Thomas. Thank you.